They tried to tow my combine harvester right out of my own damn field. I wish I were kidding. It was a Tuesday morning in late September, the sun just cracking over the ridge and the scent of dew and diesel mixing in the air. I was halfway through harvesting the eastern plot, 2 acres of soy, and minding my own when a candy apple red minivan skidded to a halt at the edge of my property, kicking up dust in self-righteous fury. Out stepped the self-appointed queen of the HOA, wearing wedge heels and a lemon-yellow cardigan like she was headed to Sunday brunch instead of declaring war. Her name was Carol Ann Whitaker. You know the type. Mid-50s, always smells like lavender dryer sheets and low-level disdain. She runs the Maple Grove Homeowners Association like it's a Fortune 500 company, even though it's just 53 houses with slightly too perfect lawns and residents too tired to argue. Carol Ann doesn't just enforce the rules. She is the rules, and she believes that gives her divine jurisdiction over everything in sight, including, apparently, my family farm. The second she saw the combine, old but sturdy, green with a fading yellow stripe, she gasped like she'd caught me sacrificing goats in broad daylight, marched straight up to the edge of her jurisdiction and pointed at the machine like it had insulted her mother. "This contraption is not permitted within HOA boundaries," she snapped, clipboard in hand like it gave her federal authority. "You're in violation of Ordinance 6B, unsightly large machinery, visible from public thoroughfares." I blinked. "It's a combine harvester. I'm harvesting. You know, food." "This is a residential community, Mr. Walker," she said, emphasizing my name like it was a curse. "We have standards." I leaned out of the cab, engine still humming beneath me. "I've lived here 27 years, Carol Ann. This field's fed half the town. Your HOA was formed 10 years ago. This land doesn't fall under your little empire." She smiled then, a tight-lipped, joyless little crescent of a smile. "Oh, but that's where you're mistaken. The board voted to extend jurisdiction last month. It passed unanimously." "Who's on the board?" I asked. Her smile widened. "I am." That's when the tow truck arrived. She'd actually called a tow truck for a combine harvester. I stepped down from the cab, hands up in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me." The tow truck driver, young guy, probably regretting every life choice that led him here, just looked between me and Carol Ann. She said, "It's a violation." "I don't know, man. I just got the order." "You got a crane in that truck, son?" I asked. "Because this thing weighs 36,000 pounds. He swallowed. She's not going anywhere," I said, patting the side of the combine like it was an old dog. "And neither am I." Carol Ann's nostrils flared, like a cartoon villain. "This is not over, Mr. Walker." No, it wasn't. Within a week, the passive-aggressive letters started showing up. They weren't mailed. Carol Ann hand-delivered them, folded with military precision, and slipped under my door at dawn. Each one listed a fresh violation. Non-compliant. Fencing, excessive dust, offensive odors from the compost pile. She fined me $250 for a noise violation because my rooster crowed at 5:43 a.m. instead of after 6. When I didn't pay, she added late fees. Then she came for the truck. It was an old Ford, barely roadworthy, but it ran fine and it was parked on my own gravel driveway. She reported it as an abandoned vehicle and tried to have it impounded. When that didn't work, she filed a civil complaint. Over a pickup. I laughed at first. Figured she'd eventually get bored. People like her usually just want attention. But Carol Ann didn't want attention. She wanted control, and she wasn't letting go. A few nights later, I found my mailbox knocked clean off its post. No witnesses, no security footage, just splintered wood and a smug silence. I replaced it. The next night, it was gone again. On the third night, I waited up with a thermos of black coffee and a baseball bat, but she must have known. I never saw a thing. But the next morning, she stood across the road, sipping from a travel mug with HOA President stamped on it in cursive gold. She winked. By October, she'd turned half the neighborhood against me. Suburban folks I'd known for years started looking the other way when I waved. The Harrises stopped buying eggs. The community newsletter ran a friendly reminder about the importance of upholding Maple Grove's image. Someone left a flyer in my mailbox that just said, move or comply. I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, timestamps, witness statements from anyone brave enough to talk. I wasn't just dealing with an overzealous rule stickler anymore. This was a one-woman regime, and she was tightening the screws, but I held my ground. Because here's the thing. Carol Ann didn't know. She could control the lawns, the fences, the paint colors, and the Christmas lights, but I controlled something far more important. The food. I own and operate the largest private crop supply within 50 miles. Corn, wheat, soy, fresh produce. I've got contracts with the local grocery store, 2 restaurants, and the school district. When the pandemic hit, I was the one who kept shelves stocked while supply chains collapsed. Without me, Maple Grove doesn't eat. She didn't know that. Not yet, and I wasn't going to tell her. Not until the moment it would hurt the most. The last straw came when she had the audacity to accuse me of running an illegal business on residential land. She sent a formal cease and desist letter with a fake lawyer's letterhead and a deadline of 10 days before she would escalate to county enforcement. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about her wanting control. She wanted me gone, and I had a choice to make. Fight dirty or fight smart. So I started digging. Not in the soil. This time I dug into her past. Property records, public filings, old HOA meeting notes. I talked to former board members, chased paper trails, pulled up tax filings. What I found, well, it changed everything. Because Carol Ann Whitaker had a secret, and she'd buried it right under her perfectly manicured lawn, literally. A decade back, when Carol Ann first moved into Maple Grove, she wasn't the self-appointed tyrant of suburbia. She was just another transplant from somewhere out east, arriving with a brittle smile and a husband who seemed permanently on the verge of apologizing for her. That husband, Jeffrey Whitaker, was listed on the original HOA charter as co-signer and board member. His signature appeared right alongside hers in every founding document. But here's the kicker. Jeffrey Whitaker's death certificate was dated 3 weeks before those signatures were filed. Either the man signed posthumously or someone forged his name. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I do know the difference between bureaucratic overreach and straight-up fraud. And what Carol Ann had done was big enough to bring her entire HOA regime crashing down like a house of cards in a hurricane. But it couldn't be rushed. Not yet. She was building pressure, and so was I. The very next morning, she posted a laminated notice on my front gate. Warning. Final HOA infraction before escalated legal action. Bold red letters like I was some kind of criminal menace. The listed infractions were a farce, improper tractor storage, non-regulation hose length. One even accused me of agricultural visual pollution. Agricultural visual pollution? I was growing lettuce, not detonating landmines. You're not winning this, Carol Ann, I said as I tore the notice down. From the sidewalk, she gave me that sugary venom smile again. I already have. Then, she turned and strutted away in her designer clogs like she was walking a runway instead of the cracked pavement outside my barn. That afternoon, 2 men in khakis and clipboards knocked on my door. City zoning compliance officers. Turns out she'd reported me for operating a commercial enterprise in violation of residential zoning laws. They poked around my shed, asked loaded questions about my farm stand, and left looking apologetic but non-committal. It was a warning. Shot. A threat wrapped in procedure. And it was working. Slowly, painfully, I started to feel it. The noose tightening. One of my restaurant contracts called to pause for review. The school district delayed their produce order pending regulatory clarification. Someone tagged my roadside sign with red spray paint. Take your farm elsewhere. She was isolating me, starving me out. So I turned to the one place no one ever suspects a farmer to strike back from: paperwork. I requested every HOA vote record from the past 10 years. Carol Ann tried to stonewall it, said they were private internal proceedings. But according to the bylaws, page 17, subsection 3.4, which I highlighted, all HOA votes must be made available to community members upon formal request. It took a formal complaint to the county clerk, but she finally caved. I picked up a manila folder the thickness of a phone book Every motion, every vote, every board amendment. And there it was, the expansion vote. The one that unanimously extended the HOA jurisdiction to include my land. Problem was, half the people listed as voters weren't even living in Maple Grove when that vote took place. One guy, Ray Duggan, had moved to Arizona in 2016. I called him. He was golfing. Hadn't thought about Maple Grove in years. I definitely didn't vote for anything, he chuckled. Carol Ann had fabricated the vote, faked the signatures, backdated the meeting notes, stamped them with a forged approval. It was a pyramid of lies propped up by the illusion of bureaucracy. But she still had the neighborhood in her grip, still wore her little name tag, President, Maple Grove HOA, like it came with real power. The residents were so afraid of losing their picture-perfect lawns and their property values that they played along, and when people play along too, long lies become law. The next escalation came swift and brutal. I woke up to blue lights flashing across the front yard, 2 squad cars, 3 officers. Carol Ann stood just behind them in a silk robe and curlers, holding a manila envelope and a steaming mug of smug satisfaction. One of the officers stepped forward. Mr. Walker, we've received reports of unauthorized land use and suspected chemical dumping. Chemical dumping? I nearly laughed. What chemicals? Carol Ann answered before I could. Pesticides, nitrates, highly dangerous substances that can leach into the groundwater. This is a residential zone. My hands curled into fists at my sides. That's manure, Carol. Cow manure. You know, fertilizer. One of the officers exchanged a look with the other. They knew, but protocol was protocol. They inspected, took photos, filed a report, promised follow-up. Carol Ann sipped her coffee and walked off humming Battle Hymn of the Republic, but she overplayed her hand. Again. Later that day, I got a knock on the barn door. It was Bethany Miller. Quiet type, mid-30s, single mom, lived 2 doors down from Carol Ann. She looked nervous, like she was doing something illegal just by standing there. I heard what happened this morning, she said. I wanted to give you this. She handed me a flash drive. What is it? I asked. Ring cam footage, she whispered. From the night your mailbox got smashed. I raised an eyebrow. Let me guess. She nodded. Carol Ann? Bethany glanced over her shoulder. Driving her golf cart. Midnight. Swerving like she was on something. My jaw tightened. You're risking a lot giving this to me. She threatened to fine me $500 because my wind chimes were too whimsical, she said flatly. Screw her, I grinned. Welcome to the resistance. Carol Ann, meanwhile, was planning something big. I could feel it. The fines had stopped. The letters, too. She was quiet. Too quiet. Then the flyer appeared. Full color, glossy, stuffed in every mailbox. Upcoming emergency HOA vote. Termination of non-compliant resident activity. She wasn't trying to control me anymore. She was trying to erase me. The flyer made it clear Carol Ann had called for an emergency HOA vote to permanently revoke agricultural operations within Maple Grove jurisdiction. She didn't name me directly, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who the target was. I stared at the flyer tacked to the corkboard at the town post office. She even used patriotic fonts, red, white, and blue lettering, as if voting. Me off the land was some kind of civic duty. The meeting was set for Friday at 7 p.m. in the community clubhouse. Circled the date in thick black ink on my calendar. Friday. That was when she planned to strike the final blow. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that her own weapon was about to backfire. First, I had to build my counterattack. I spent the next few days knocking on doors, quietly, deliberately, finding the neighbors she'd bullied, fined, manipulated into submission. Most of them answered with the same exhausted look in their eyes. People who'd once whispered complaints behind curtains now met me with long, silent stares, unsure if siding with me meant their own necks were next. Then I showed them what I'd found. The fraudulent vote, the fake signature, the flash drive. Footage of Carol Ann swerving into my mailbox like she was doing her own twisted version of bumper cars. Bethany had done me one better. She'd stitched in a timestamp overlay. And when I hit pause on the moment her golf cart careened into the post, you could clearly see her grinning through the windshield. Think she'll fine herself for that? I asked. By Wednesday, the mood had shifted. Not outright rebellion yet, but you could feel it in the air, like the static before a storm. Then came the first real sign that Carol Ann was feeling the pressure. She showed up on my property. No clipboard, no paperwork. Just standing there in her tennis skirt and oversized sunglasses, staring at my fields like she was scoping out enemy territory. "I see you've been busy," she said. "I didn't stop stacking crates into the truck bed. Always am. You've been talking to people. I tend to do that. Comes with being human." She took a slow step forward, like a predator testing the edge of a trap. "You think you're clever, but clever doesn't win. Procedure does, authority, rules. You mean your rules. They are mine. I built this community. I gave it standards, order. Before I arrived, this place was just wild grass and bumpkin pride." That hit a nerve. I stepped closer, crate still in hand. "Before you arrived, this place fed itself. Before you rewrote every rule, people helped each other. Nobody cared if a trash bin was left out 10 extra minutes. They cared about neighbors, Carol Ann." She didn't flinch. "I don't need them to like me. I need them to comply." And with that, she turned and walked away. Back to her neat little empire of beige vinyl siding and weaponized civility. Friday came fast. The community clubhouse had never been so full. Folding chairs packed in rows, every seat taken. People stood along the walls, whispering. Some were just curious. Others were sharpening pitchforks in their minds. Carol Ann sat at the front table like a queen behind her dais, microphone in hand, gavel by her side, wearing a blazer with an American flag pin as if this were Capitol Hill. "Order," she said crisply. "This emergency session is now in progress." She motioned to a large easel beside her. On it, in thick black marker, was the proposal. Motion to revoke all non-residential operations from within Maple Grove jurisdiction. No one spoke. She smiled. "I will now open the floor for limited comments before we proceed to a board vote." I raised my hand. Her smile twitched. "Recognized. Mr. Walker." I stood. "Before anyone votes on anything, I'd like to read a quick list." I pulled a piece of paper from my jacket. "Here's just a handful of fines and warnings, issued by this board, by you, Carol Ann, in the past 3 months. I read them aloud. $150 fine for unapproved inflatable holiday decor, a snowman. $200 for a loud wind chime sited at 3:12 p.m. on a Sunday. $100 gravel overflow violation. $250 for overly casual mailbox design." The crowd started murmuring, people shifting, eyebrows raising. "I could go on," I said, "but I think we all get the picture." Carol Ann leaned into her mic. "Mr. Walker, this is not the time for personal grievances." "No," I said, my voice steady. "This is the time to ask why we've let one person turn Maple Grove into a miniature dictatorship." I turned to the room. "You all think she can't be stopped, that the rules are ironclad, but they're only as strong as the people willing to follow them." "Out of order," Carol Ann barked. "You're not recognized." I ignored her. "And here's the thing. This vote, the expansion of jurisdiction that made my farm part of the HOA, that never legally happened." I pulled another paper from my jacket. "Here are the records. Signatures from people who'd already moved away, meeting minutes that contradict other filings. And the cherry on top?" I held up the flash drive. "Video evidence of your HOA president committing property damage. Herself." Gasps. A few. People stood. Carol Ann's face was a mask of fury, but before she could speak, I added, "And if anyone wants more, I'll be happy to share the documents. In fact, I already did." I nodded toward the back. Bethany stepped forward. And behind her, Mr. Temple, the town clerk, 2 members of the zoning board, and Edgar Bloom, local attorney and councilman, in a suit 3 times more expensive than anything in the room. Carol Ann's face went white. "You don't have the right," she stammered. Edgar cut her off. Actually, Carol Ann, we've reviewed the HOA's charter, and given the falsified vote records and abusive process, this emergency meeting is now under municipal investigation. She rose from her chair. You can't do this. Watch me, Edgar said. The crowd was buzzing now, some angry, some stunned, some delighted, but Carol Ann wasn't done. Her eyes locked onto me with a burning intensity. This isn't over, she hissed. No, I said, but your chokehold on this town is. She stormed out, knocking over the easel on her way. The gavel clattered to the floor. No one picked it up. That night, I found something in my mailbox. No return address. Just a single sheet of paper inside. Typed. Anonymous. She knows about the storage shed. Check the permits before she does. I stood in the moonlight, reading the words over and over. My stomach dropped. She wasn't going down. Not yet. I held the anonymous letter in my hands, the words burning like kerosene. She knows about the storage shed. Check the permits before she does. The shed, my chest tightened. It was tucked behind the north barn, out of sight from the main road, a steel frame structure with a tin roof built during the supply chain shortages to house extra equipment and backup grain for emergency use. I'd rushed the construction, pulled permits through a temporary zoning waiver granted by the county during the pandemic. That waiver had expired 6 months ago. If Carol Ann had discovered it, and I had no doubt she had, she was probably already loading her next salvo. And this time, it wouldn't be a fake fine or forged document. She'd use my own paperwork against me, hit me with a zoning violation, maybe even get me slapped with commercial property tax rates, environmental code infractions. Hell, she'd bury me in red tape and make it look perfectly legal. The battle wasn't over. It was about to go nuclear. Saturday morning, I called in. A favor. Frank Donnelly, a local contractor and a man with zero patience for bullies, had helped build that shed. He kept copies of every permit he filed, including the ones I signed under emergency ordinance. I'll dig 'em up, he said over the phone. But if she's poking around, you best get ahead of it. By noon, I had scanned copies of everything, stamped, dated, legal, except one. The final approval signature from the county zoning board. It was missing. The permit had been processed during the height of the shutdowns, and apparently someone had never added the final sign-off. In the rush of backlog, incomplete paperwork. Just enough to give Carol Ann leverage, and she knew it. Because that night, she made her move. A certified letter arrived Sunday morning, slid under my door by a courier too nervous to make eye contact. Notice of zoning and environmental noncompliance. Immediate cease and desist. It was thick, filled with references to county codes, property assessments, citations of vague statutes, and at the bottom, in perfect, precise legal print. Failure to comply will result in legal enforcement, asset seizure, and property liens. She was going for the throat, but she had one fatal flaw. She thought this was about property. It wasn't. It was about people. Monday morning, I called a town hall meeting, not an HOA meeting, not on her turf. I rented out the VFW lodge downtown, neutral ground. I didn't post flyers. I didn't knock on doors. I just made a few quiet calls, enough to start the chain reaction. By 7 p.m., the room was packed. Not just neighbors, everyone. Restaurant owners, grocery clerks, teachers, people who ate from the land I farmed, people who'd once stayed quiet out of fear, now sitting shoulder to shoulder, waiting to see if the tyrant of Maple Grove would finally fall. And she walked in late, of course, flanked by her usual 3 loyal board members, each of whom looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I stepped up to the mic. Thank you all for coming. Tonight's not about bylaws or turf wars. It's about truth and choice. I handed out copies of the cease and desist letter. Carol Ann has accused me of violating zoning laws. She wants to shut down the shed. Without it, I can't meet next season's supply contracts. That means shelves go empty, school lunches go short, farmers' market closes early. There were murmurs, concerned voices. I held up the incomplete permit. She's not wrong. The paperwork's flawed. But here's the thing. This isn't a violation. It's an oversight. a missing signature on a county document that was processed in the middle of a global crisis. Then I pointed to the back. In stepped Susan Eldridge, head of county zoning. She took the mic. The permit was filed. All safety protocols were followed. And while the signature is technically missing, we've issued a retroactive ratification effective immediately. Carol Ann's face froze mid-blink. Susan wasn't finished. Additionally, we've launched a review of recent complaints filed through the HOA, and we're investigating a pattern of targeted harassment and misuse of municipal resources. The room buzzed louder, but the final blow? That came from the projector I'd quietly wheeled in earlier. I clicked the remote. A video played. Carol Ann, seated at her kitchen table, speaking into her webcam. A private Zoom call, one she never knew was recorded. A recording Bethany had gotten from her husband, who used to do IT support for Carol Ann before she stiffed him on a bill. Of course I faked a few votes. They're sheep. You just wave a paper and they fall in line. And Walker? He'll fold once we start hitting him in the wallet. He's a farmer, not a lawyer. The room fell dead silent. Then came the murmurs. The chair of the zoning board leaned to his aide. One of Carol Ann's own board members stood up and walked straight out. She tried to speak, but the mic was off. No one gave it back to her. The fallout was swift. The HOA was suspended pending full investigation. Carol Ann was removed as president. By a majority vote the next morning, several residents filed official complaints. Her remaining allies vanished like snow in spring. But the true punishment was social. People stopped waving. Conversations died when she entered a room. Her name was muttered like a curse. One by one, her power drained away, not by force, but by indifference. The final time I saw her, she was pruning her roses in silence while a "for sale" sign hung in her yard. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. She knew she'd lost everything. The shed stayed. I added a new solar panel. We doubled crop production by spring. Bethany took over the HOA in a temporary role. She stripped half the rules within a week. Holiday inflatables came back in full force that Christmas. So did the wind chimes. I dropped off a basket of tomatoes at the town hall one afternoon. Susan Eldridge smiled and said, "You're not just growing food, you know. You grew something else here." I nodded. A backbone. Some folks still ask if I miss the quiet. Before the war with Carol Ann. Truth is, I don't. Because now, the peace is earned. And every time I see a crooked mailbox or a slightly too long hose stretched across someone's lawn, I smile. Carol. Ann tried to control the neighborhood with rules. Turns out, freedom grows better in good soil.